So we continue our journey through the Harry Potter video games with the sequel, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Like the first game, this was released just a few days before the film back in November of 2002. The game was released on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, PC, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, and even the original PlayStation 1. This was actually the last game to release for the Game Boy Color, and was the last Potter game to be released on the original PlayStation. This time we're going to be looking at the GameCube version, which I know wasn't the version I used when I originally reviewed the game last time, but there's a funny story here. You see, I actually received my first copy of Chamber of Secrets for Christmas back in 2002, and I had that copy for about 4 years or so until it started to give me a disc read error message, usually at different points. Sometimes it happened at the midpoint of the game, sometimes it happened earlier, sometimes it happened at the end, until eventually one day I couldn't even load a brand new game. Literally selecting new game and trying to load it up brought the game to the crash screen. I took care of the disc and everything, so I'm not entirely sure what happened, but regardless, I couldn't use it anymore. Then one summer in 2005, I felt kind of nostalgic to the point of really wanting to play it again, so I tracked down the game at a local retro video game store. However, they only had the PS2 version, and I bought this without a second thought because I figured it couldn't possibly be more different from the Xbox version I'd grown up with. See, multi-platform games like this tend to always look and play the same for the most part. The PlayStation 2 version, as I came to learn, was slightly a different experience than the Xbox, which I'll go more into detail when we get to the presentation section of this review. After that, it wasn't until 2013 when I went on Amazon to hunt down the actual original Xbox version again, which I found pretty easy. Upon playing it, I found that the game's cutscenes moved at like 5 frames per second, but the rest worked fine. Naturally, I thought the copy that I'd gotten had scratches or something, and that was triggering the slowdown. So I actually bought another copy, only to find that this copy had the same issues. Then after a bit of online research, which in hindsight I probably should have done before buying that second copy, I learned that both versions of the game that I had now in my possession were completely fine, and that it's just the Xbox 360 emulation that affects Chamber of Secrets by causing lag in the cutscenes. So there I was with 4 copies of the same game, and while the Xbox version of Chamber was definitely playable, the lag in the cutscenes was pretty atrocious. Seriously, I remember playing this back the first time I did the review for the channel, and the cutscenes take, I think, maybe 3 minutes of real time if it wasn't going in lag, but about maybe 7 minutes, 10 minutes if it's completely going slow. It's pretty bad. So when I was gearing up to re-review Chamber for this, I was ready to sit down and deal with the lag all over again when I found out that my last 2 copies of the game are no longer working. The first newer copy is now giving me the error red screen that I used to get on my original copy, and the second disc is cracked in half through some means that I can't really explain. At this point, I was about to order another copy of the Xbox version because, hey, why not own 4 Xbox copies of the same game when I had a brilliant idea? What about the GameCube version? So I grabbed a copy of that instead, and honestly, I probably should have done this years ago. So without further delay, let's take a look at Chamber of Secrets. This time around, the adaptation of the story is handled much differently. Gone are those narrated still image sections, and place are actual cutscenes with character models. Like the last game, most of the major events from the film are present, though again there are questionable changes. One of the more questionable cuts would be the character of Dobby the House Elf. Normally I wouldn't be too concerned with a cut character, but not only does the back of the box clearly state that Dobby's in the game, he's kind of a big part of the plot. The lack of his presence caused several other plot lines to be rewritten as a result, in addition to some just being omitted. For instance, in the book, Harry and Ron miss the Hogwarts Express since Dobby blocks the entrance. In the game, though, it's a painful rewrite. Here, Harry goes into Flourish and Blots with Mrs. Weasley and Ginny to see Gilderoy Lockhart. When only minutes into this meeting, Ron comes barging in and tells Harry that they've somehow missed the train. Well, I guess that was nice of Ginny and Mrs. Weasley just leaving Harry and Ron behind. Another major cut is the development of the Gilderoy Lockhart character. You meet him at the beginning of the game, and then again during the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, and then that's it. He isn't blackmailed by Harry and Ron to find the chamber, nor is his true character of being a fraud ever mentioned and brought to light. And his memory is never erased. He's just completely dropped from the story after the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Hell, he's not even in the Great Hall scene at the end of the game. The rest of the story has some small tweaks and changes, but they don't heavily affect the story. Like the Polyjuice section, for example. Only Harry gets turned into Goyle. Ron's not even there, and Hermione just waits for you in the girls' bathroom. It's similar to the plot layout of the first game in that you'll be off doing some random task that the game's created in its plot before being thrown back into the plot found in the book. For instance, on one night, Harry will leave his bed to go find a spellbook to help Hermione out, and on the way back he'll encounter Nearly Headless Nick being petrified, which then leads to the talk in Dumbledore's office. Also, the length of the game is a lot longer than the last, and it even lends itself to some slight replay value. You complete Harry's second year in about maybe 6 hours or so, and then there's the incentive to explore Hogwarts. You can race other students in broomstick races, throw gnomes, find wizard cards, and find lost items from the notice board in the Gryffindor common room. There are a lot more cards to collect this time around than the pitiful 17 that there was in the PlayStation 1 version, and some of them you have to trade with other students to get. The one downside to trying to complete the collection is that some of the cards are locked from when you leave certain areas. If you miss any cards at the Burrow, Diagon Alley, or the Forbidden Forest sections, then there's no way back in to go get them. Quidditch returns, and it pretty much functions like how it did in the last game. The goal is still to fly through the rings, but it's been tweaked to now where the rings make you fly faster, and after you go through enough of them, you can boost ahead and reach the snitch. The opposing team's sneaker might show up from time to time, and occasionally they might take the lead. However, once you've boosted ahead, it's usually enough to leave them in the dust. Catching the snitch now throws the camera around to show Harry flying towards the screen as the snitch flies around you, and you'll have to wait until it lines up with Harry's hands in order to make a catch. A really cool feature added to the game is the ability to free roam fly around Hogwarts. There's a few hidden chests hidden around in different sections of the castle, but honestly, it's fun to just jump on the broom and fly around. You can't speed up as fast as you can in Quidditch matches, but I still have fun with it. All these activities create a much more immersive Hogwarts, and if the activities don't provide any interest, you can just fly around Hogwarts and take in the scenery. This all gives you a reason to stick around after the credits have rolled. Thankfully though, the main gameplay is a huge improvement over the last game. Harry can now target enemies and objects in the environment, and then cast whatever spell that he wants to use. While targeting enemies, Harry can dodge and evade incoming attacks. In addition, you now have the ability to wall sneak, which allows you to slip through small gaps and spaces, in addition to tiptoeing your way across very narrow ledges. And also the auto jump ability is back. The spells that you collect in this game are Flipendo, which is still used to attack creatures and interact with the majority of things in the environment, Expelliarmus, which is used to send spells back at their caster by acting as a shield of sorts, Defendo, which can cut down tapestries and cut ropes, Lumos, which can be used to light up the dark areas to find hidden panels to open up secret pathways, Scourge, which can remove ectoplasm, and I don't even want to know how all this ectoplasm got all around Hogwarts, Avifor's returns, and now it's used to turn stones into birds, Incendio also returns, and it once again burns things just like spiderwebs, in addition to lighting torches. And finally, there's the Alohomora spell, which can open up locked chests, although this spell is hidden away and you have to buy it from Fred and George's joke shop. All the spells are now cast in the same way, in that all you have to do is assign a spell to a face button on the controller, and then you just simply press the button. It's much more simplistic than the entire button minigame combo press thing you had to do in the last game. Like I said, there's no minigames to be found here, just press the button and the spell is yours to control. Learning spells is also much more enjoyable and engaging. This time around, Harry will attend classes in which the professor tasks him with retrieving a spellbook inside of a challenge chamber. Once Harry obtains the spellbook, he'll face a boss encounter and then use the spell to escape back into the classroom. The only downside to these chambers is that they are a tad small and they probably will only take you a few minutes to complete. They work almost exactly like how classes worked in the PC version of Sorcerer's Stone, and honestly, this change was for the best. When compared to how spells were learned in the last game, this structure is a lot better. At least this method is much more interactive. You gotta perform different spells to get past obstacles and enemies in the chambers, which is better than just following a weird Simon Says pattern. The structure also allows for equal usage of each spell. I can tell you right now that there is no spell that gets neglected in this version of the game. Now everything seems to be going well for this follow-up, though there are a few little negatives to contend with. The first has to do with the way that the game implements the Bertie Bott's beans. This time around, Harry collects a set number of beans of any color. The beans are then used to buy objects from Fred and George's joke shop. Their shop contains some cool items, like I said, the Alohomora spellbook, and a bigger bag for collecting beans, which you're going to need to get that spellbook. Though most of the items are just wizard cards and a couple of potion vials, which basically help you get extra health. Yeah, I guess I should probably mention this. There's a thing early in the game where you're given the Wiggenwell potion, which was kind of that thing we were making in the first game. You know, the cauldrons that were randomly sprouted around and would allow you to make a quick potion to heal yourself up, even though there were chocolate frogs literally every 5 steps. The Wiggenwell potion basically acts as a sort of potion that you can carry around. You can assign it to a face button too and try to regain Harry's health, but honestly, I just take the hit and die on, because really it's not a big deal. There's checkpoints at most points and levels and stuff, so it's not like you're repeating huge chunks of the level. Now, however, unlike in the last game in regards to the beans, Harry will lose the beans when he's hit by the enemies. Now, the game is nice enough to let you pick up the beans you lost, sort of like Sonic has to pick up his rings when he gets hit, though in some cases another enemy will hit you again, causing you to lose even more beans. And this happens way too frequently, and honestly, you're better off not collecting any if you're about to enter a challenge chamber, because you'll just end up losing loads. In most cases, when I wanted to buy something from the shop, I just farmed beans off the 7th floor corridor by hitting a bunch of items, and then I just went in and out of the common room to reset them. Then I bought what I wanted, and then I moved on. The other issue I had was the one type of enemy the game introduces about halfway through. Once you obtain Scourge, and you start using it to remove that ectoplasm, Harry will end up releasing several ghosts. Now these ghost enemies usually will spot you and then proceed to charge into you, taking damage and making your beans fly all over the place. Now it's a minor annoyance when you're on the ground, but when you're trying to jump onto platforms or wall sneak, you're kinda screwed. You have no choice but to take the damage and lose beans in the process, like I said. And I know a ton of people have commented on the original review about how Lumos can stop them and remove them, but I'm telling you, I tried that for hours and hours, and nothing removes them. I'm thinking they get confused with the remake of Sorcerer's Stone, because in that game these ghosts are enemies too, and in there the Lumos spell hurts them and gets rid of them. The game also tries to reincorporate the stealth mechanic, and it comes off a bit worse than the last game. Apparently, Harry forgot about his invisibility cloak, or he left it back at the Dursleys, since it's never mentioned or used. Instead, the game turns into Metal Gear Potter, as you're given a bird's eye perspective in some rooms, and Harry is meant to wall sneak and peer around corners to see who's approaching. He can also fire bullets, spells, to distract the prefix. Now I say meant to do all this since it's often possible to just run through these zones without looking and just moving the left analog stick to move the camera around to get a better view and zip through them. Thankfully there's only a few of these stealth segments. I understand that implementing the cloak was hard in the last game, but that doesn't mean to just ignore it, and I feel like that was the answer here. It's like they tried in the last game to do it, the whole using it as a collectible didn't come off right, so they said screw it, let's just not even do it and just have Harry sneaking around. I still think using it as a pickup token was the best they could have done. They should have just made the area bigger and make the player have to plan ahead about how to use the cloak in time to avoid detection, and it would have been good enough. But instead it just really feels like they got lazy and they just didn't want to improve on what they'd done before, so they just removed it. The last negative would have to be the difficulty. Whereas in the first game it had little difficulty thanks in part to the lack of enemies and bosses, Chamber has a bunch of mini-boss fights, dueling sections, and finally major boss fights against the creatures from the film like Aragog and the Basilisk. Now the boss fights, regardless of whether they're the mini ones or the major ones, all have a set way of damaging them, and you'll repeat that process over and over until they drop. It's not really challenging. For instance, the gargoyle statues that you fight in each of the challenge chambers are all damaged in exactly the same way. You engage in this simple tennis-like match where Harry has to use Expelliarmus to send the spell back at the gargoyle. And this strategy makes sense when you're in the Expelliarmus challenge because that's the spell you just learned, but you do the same thing in the Avifors and Incendio challenges. And in the Incendio challenge, you fight 3 of them, all the same exact way, like one right after another, which is hella repetitive. I still don't know why you just couldn't use the new spells you just acquired to fight them in the other challenges, or a combination of all the spells you'd learned so far. It would have let the player figure out a new strategy to bring them down rather than relying on the same old method that you've been doing since the beginning of the game. Major boss fights like Aragog and the Basilisk are also brought down rather easily. With Aragog, you just have to sort of spam Flipendo, and he just randomly takes damage over time, which kind of makes it a drag. But the Basilisk fight is even more drawn out than it ought to be. You see, you have to pick up Gryffindor's sword, dodge the Basilisk spitting venom, and then shock him with the blade. Then the blade will go flying out of Harry's hands, and you have to pick it up again and repeat the process. You do this 5 more times, and each time you do it and shock the Basilisk, he crawls into a pipe and then he comes back out. The Basilisk attacks never change over the course of the fight. In most games, the ones that are well designed, bosses tend to change up their moves as the fight goes on. But not here. Nope, the Basilisk relies on the same spit and venom trick right from the beginning each time. He just does it slightly longer each time you damage him. Also, I need to ask this, what exactly is the Sword of Gryffindor in this game? Because the last time I checked, the sword is something that, you swing and stab with, yet here it's shooting out this electric current, and you kind of aim it at the Basilisk's neck, and then he kind of just doesn't like it. I get that maybe having a sort of actual, fight with a sword would have been kind of weird and strange at the last 11th hour to bring that into the gameplay, but it just comes off as kind of strange. I guess they just decided to make it look similar to how you work with spells, so they assign it to a face button, you press it, and then it kind of shoots out like a spell you control. Still a little weird. Not bad, not like I'm complaining about it, it's something that every time I play I just think, what exactly am I doing with this sword? While these are negatives, they're not game-breaking. They're just things that sour an experience that for the most part is enjoyable and immersive. The presentation is even better than the last time, with even more areas replicated from the films like the exterior of Hogwarts itself, the boys' dormitory, the grand staircase, and the defense against the dark arts classroom. A major feature of the presentation ties into which version of the game you play, as I mentioned way back at the start. So, in the Xbox and GameCube version, the presentation is different from what you'll find in the PS2 version. The frame rate and the graphics are slightly tweaked as they're more defined in the Xbox and GameCube than with the PS2 version. The reason I think that is due to the free roam element that's included in the PS2 version. See, in that version, you can explore all of the grounds of Hogwarts from the entrance doors all the way down to the Black Lake. Whereas in the Xbox and GameCube version, if you go outside Hogwarts, you can't actually free roam walk. You sort of choose a direction that you want to travel in, and the game warps you to that location. For example, you might be trying to go down to the Quidditch pitch, and you'll start walking on that path, and then you'll magically be in front of it. I can only assume that rendering the whole ground in the PS2 version took its toll on the game's engine and the frame rate, and that's why it looks and plays the way it does. It's not terrible by any means, but I just love that smooth, cartoonish, slick look that the Xbox and the GameCube version has, which means that you definitely should play either one of those versions. The score again is once again composed by Jeremy Soule, and it's a great improvement. Now there's music playing throughout the game with no moments of silence. However, this has got to be one of the best soundtracks in the entire series. There's a sense of warmth in most of the tracks that play during the quiet parts, such as walking around Diagon Alley or Hogwarts itself. Then there are the triumphant tracks that sound amazing as you fly around the grounds or get into battles with magical creatures. You'll be hooked on the soundtrack from the intro video itself. God, I let that play each time I boot this game up, and hell, the version on the soundtrack is even more badass with that extended choir part. There's no reason that the score to a movie-based tie-in should sound this amazing. I was always a tad disappointed that the games could never incorporate that John Williams theme, but he crafted something so unique and memorable that it's been 20 years later and I still love this soundtrack. Looking at the jump between Stone and Chamber, EA really tried to improve on some of the aspects that were underwhelming the first time around. Even with some minor flaws and an easy difficulty level, Chamber is still an enjoyable ride. As I mentioned in the last video, this game served as a template for the remake of Sorcerer's Stone, which was released in 2003. It basically retains the same core gameplay mechanics that you'll find in this game. The remake kind of received low scores since most of the spells were lifted straight from Chamber, and it didn't really do anything drastically different from this game. The remake is probably only better than the PS1 version since it plays more like the clearly superior sequel. But don't worry, we'll take another look at that too in the future as well. So join us next time if we can see if EA can improve upon the developments from Chamber of Secrets when we get to relook at Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Thanks for watching.